I went to a 100-player tournament in Atlanta, Georgia this month, and we actually ended up having 105 participants, making it the biggest Beyblade X tournament that I've participated in this year. The caveat is that I tried to win with Leon Claw. If you're not super familiar with Beyblade, then you probably have no idea what I'm saying or that competitive Beyblade even exists. A lot of you are probably like, don't you just pull the thing and hope for the best? Beyblade actually has a fair amount of strategy and always has, and don't worry, we're gonna go through it, so if you stick around, you'll learn something about competitive Beyblade. For those of you who are familiar with Beyblade, you're probably wondering why I am using Leon Claw. It's a very average Beyblade. Even when it came out, it wasn't particularly good. And as new releases have come out over the last couple years, the gap between Leon Claw and the top tier has gotten wider. So why am I still using it? The short answer is I just like the way that it looks. It's not particularly good, and I know that. However, I like the challenge. I've been playing Beyblade for 20 years, and King, the character that uses it, and Leon Claw remind me of a character that would have been in the White Tigers, which was my favorite team when I was a kid, and that's why I continue to use it. I've been playing long enough that I feel like I have a pretty firm grasp of the core mechanics of Beyblade, and again, if you're new to Beyblade, that may sound like a strange thing to say, but there is, again, like I said, a decent amount of strategy and a lot of different things that can impact your odds of winning, which we're going to go over briefly. So Beyblade is structured into three main types. You have attack, defense, and stamina, and each of those in the type triangle are supposed to beat one of the others. So attack is supposed to beat stamina, stamina is supposed to beat defense, and defense is supposed to be attack. And then there's balance type, which is usually a mixture of the two. Leon Claw is classified as one of those, being sort of stamina and attack, and that's sort of how I build it myself. It's not particularly great at attack, and it's not particularly great at stamina, but it does have niche uses into some things. It particularly excels into other attack types, being not as recoil prone as some of the heavy hitters due to its shape. The biggest issue with Leon Claw is it's just not that heavy. A big factor in the meta is things that are heavier tend to just spin longer and hit harder. So unfortunately, I have to try to compensate with that with the combo that I put it on, as well as the different techniques that I use in terms of launching to try to give myself the best odds possible of winning with it. We'll go over the deck first before getting into some of the other core mechanics so you guys have sort of an understanding of what's happening when we get to the tournament. For the main build, which is Leon Claw, of course we have the blade itself. Like I said, it's sort of a mix between stamina and attack. It's got 5 sides, not super recoily because of the blunt edges, and it's not particularly heavy, unfortunately. It's actually pretty light, which was one of its biggest downfalls. If it was several grams heavier, it would be substantially better. But unfortunately it's not, which is why I paired it with 760, which is a fairly heavy ratchet. It does have one nub that sort of doesn't line up properly with a lot of things and can be sort of burst prone, which is one of the loss conditions when your Beyblade separates. In Leon's case, that extra nub lines up perfectly with one of its attack points sort of protecting it, lowering the risk of bursts. And then for the bit, which sort of dictates the movement pattern, I've chosen Taper, which again is sort of a balance type bit. It's a mixture of attack and stamina, and it has sort of a flat edge, which sort of dictates the aggressive movement, and then it sort of tapers off on the edges, giving it more stamina than something like flat or low flat. So now that we have a combo built, what's next? Well, this format is played with a deck of 3. So you need to build 3 combos to have a complete deck, but we're not quite done with this one, because while we do have the parts that we want, we haven't quite optimized yet. And you may be wondering, what does that mean? You have the parts, what else is there to do? Well, so Beyblades have variants out of the mold. Some of them are heavier than others, some parts are more balanced than others. So in order to optimize, you want to try to find the heaviest parts possible, as well as the most balanced parts, in order to create the most optimal combo. Is this necessary? No. However, it's kind of like Pokemon. If you're familiar with competitive Pokemon, they have IVs and EVs, and these are stats that we're not supposed to know about. You're supposed to just play the game. However, in order to optimize a Pokemon, you have to pay attention to those hidden stats. This is sort of the same thing. So you want to go through and try to find the heaviest parts, the most balanced parts, and this can actually have a substantial impact. If you have two of the same Beyblades with the same parts. It's not guaranteed to be a coin flip. Sometimes a more optimized, balance-tuned combo will just work better than the other one, regardless of the fact that they are using the exact same parts. If you're curious about balance tuning, I am going to do a video on it in the future. It can be a little tedious and time-consuming. Is it necessary? No, but it is something that you can do to optimize your chances of potentially winning. And in this case with Leon Claw, because it's already not at the top of the tier list, I'm going to do everything that I can to try to milk it as much as possible. Once you finish optimizing the combo, you're free to throw it in the deck box. Again, you don't have to, but there's a lot of variables that go into it. Not just the weight, but things like ratchet tightness. Some are just tighter than others, which is a way to reduce your burst risk. The other thing too are bits. Some of them are heavier, some of them are straighter, some of them have just slightly better burst resistance. It's one of those things you can sort of fiddle around with and sort of optimize a combo, and it can really change sort of the course of the battle, especially things that are super burst prone. If you find a super tight ratchet, that can make a huge difference. But now that we've done that, we can throw that in the deck box, but we still need 2 more combos. And this is a major part of competitive. It's because we're playing 3-on-3. The way that it works is you have a deck of 3, your opponent has a deck of 3, and then when you go to battle, you order them in order of play. So 1, 2, and 3. And we're playing to 5 points. So a burst is 2 points, a spin finish is 1 point, a KO into the pockets is 2 points, and an extreme finish is 3 points. And basically, after you've ordered your deck, you play in that order 1, 2, and 3 until a player hits 5 points. If they don't hit 5 points by the end of the third Beyblade, you reshuffle your deck and then you continue to play until somebody hits 5 points. One of the biggest points of strategy in deck format like this is that when you go to the table to battle, you can see your opponent's Beyblades and they can see yours. You have no idea which order that they're going to place theirs in. You sort of do that in secret before the battle. So again, sort of like competitive Pokemon in that you're bringing a team, you're picking an order that your team is not aware of, they don't know how well optimized your stuff is, and if they don't have good game knowledge, they don't actually know necessarily what to play in, which is one of the advantages of Leon Claw. A lot of people don't play it, so people don't know how to interact with it, they don't know what's good or bad against it, and so they sort of just disregard it. But if you have really good game knowledge and part knowledge, you can take something that isn't necessarily good and potentially do well with it just because your opponent has no idea how to order their deck because of it. Knowing their deck and knowing the meta as well gives you an advantage too. If they come up with a competitive deck, you can sort of predict what they're going to lead with based on what's going to give them the best odds of winning, and that's usually how people play. So if people have a super aggressive attack combo and you don't, they're probably going to lead with that. Depending on the combos that you bring and the combos that your opponent brings can change the predictions and how you want to lead your match. So like I said, in this case, because Leon Claw is not particularly top tier, we want to build 2 other combos that can potentially help carry it along a little bit if we end up in a situation where Leon Claw has no good matchups against our opponent's deck. For the next build, I went with something a little more aggressive with Shark Scale. This is relatively new at the time of the tournament and only had been out for a couple of weeks. It seemed promising in testing, so I opted to try to take it. It's very heavy and the blade sits substantially lower than most other attack types, making it really good at ratchet sniping as well as upper attack. Paired with 450, which is the lowest ratchet, and low rush, it ends up sitting lower than most other combos are even capable of. Because Beyblade X tends to favor attack types in terms of point accumulation with bursts and KOs netting you more points than spin finishes, it's always a good idea to have something aggressive to try to get you more points in your deck. So with our second slot now taken, we have 1 slot left, and I usually do at least 1 safe combo, and there's a couple reasons for this. One is it's a really good way to get a singular point, so if you lead off with something aggressive and you manage to get a KO or an extreme finish, your second slot can net you another sort of easier point that's less risky. It also can potentially be a good way to lead off, especially if you're playing against a deck that is hyper aggressive or is something that you're a little unfamiliar with. You can sort of lead with a bit of a safer combo in order to figure out what their strategy is or how they tend to launch, and that can give you a bit of a leg up going into a potential second round. For the last build, I ended up going with Wizard Rod on 1 160 Hexa. Wizard Rod is incredibly versatile. You can put it on almost anything, and chances are it's going to do relatively well. You can put it on 360 ball or 960 ball for a pure stamina build, or you can put it on 160 rush, low rush, or level for more of a balanced build, which matches up really well into other attack types as well as Rod itself. And then you've got Rod 160 Hexa, which is more of a defensive combo. With 160, it has this sort of unintentional effect where if it gets knocked into a pocket, the shape of the 160 can kick off the sides of the pocket and potentially pop back out, saving you from potentially a 2-point loss. And then Hexa is really well balanced, not quite as much stamina as Ball, but it has way more staying power than Ball does, making it probably the best defense option in the game right now. And with Rod rounding out the final slot in the deck, we are finally ready to head to the tournament, which is about 2 hours away in Atlanta. And unfortunately, during the drive, at some point, I popped a pinhole in my upper radiator hose and leaked out all of my coolant. So that was super fun, but we did end up making it there. This is fun. Because of the quantity of people, we weren't able to play Swiss and instead needed to play about a total of 15 rounds in order to win. And you could only have a few losses before you were knocked out, so there wasn't much room for error. And with that, I was ready to start the tournament, but not before talking about today's sponsor. Into the AM is an online clothing company that reached out to me, and I am a sucker for graphic t-shirts, so I was interested, and I was very pleasantly surprised to learn that they hire real artists. This is an actual graphic designed by a real guy, and I watched the video, which I'm gonna put up on the screen. It's actually pretty impressive. But not only the front, but check out the back. Freaking sick. Anyway, I'm a sucker for graphic t-shirts, so I had to take them up on it. If you guys are interested in checking them out, I'll have a link down in the description as well as the pinned comment. Code Nazuma will get you a discount. It will help support the channel, and you guys can get some cool clothes. These are also like really high quality, by the way. I was concerned that they would be like not comfortable, because a lot of like online clothing apparel companies use like the cheapest stuff possible. These are actually like really stretchy, really comfortable. They breathe really well. Anyway, I like them. I would like to continue partnering with them, so definitely check them out. Anyway, thanks again Into the AM for sponsoring this video. Going into the first round, I matched up against a pretty aggressive deck, being Hover Wyvern 960 Kick, Pegasus Blast Wheel 770 Free Ball, and Phoenix Wing 360 Low Rush. So I ended up trying to play pretty safe with my deck order, leading off with Wizard Rod, and followed up by Shark and then Leon Claw last. Leon Claw does do pretty well into Phoenix Wing, but it doesn't do well into Hover Wyvern or Pegasus Blast. Going into the first round, I ended up matching Wizard Rod up against Hover Wyvern, and I had a pretty good launch, putting myself on the opposite side of the stadium and then back towards the back, which put me in pretty good positioning to avoid KOs, at least at the initial launch, and the match ended up going pretty well here. So I was able to take the first round with a spin finish against Wyvern, netting myself 1 point, and again we are going to 5 points. In the next slot, I had Shark, again on 450 Low Rush against his Phoenix Wing, which on paper should be a pretty easy matchup. I had a really good launch, and Shark should outspin Phoenix. But I ended up getting burst. I was not expecting to be burst by pretty much anything unless it was another Shark, just because of how low it is. I'm not even sure that there was ratchet contact. I'm thinking that maybe the impact pushed it into the rails and caused a burst off of the rails itself, but it didn't work out particularly favorable for me. And then we ended up matching Leon Claw into Pegasus, which of course is a terrible matchup for it. So at this point, I needed to restructure my deck, and because I was down a couple points here, I was kind of skeptical on where to lead it. So I ended up trying to play safe again with Wizard Rod on Hexa against Pegasus Blast, which again on paper should be a pretty safe bet, but unfortunately for me, I had some bad positioning and ended up getting extreme finished, leaving myself with 1 loss so far in the tournament, which basically immediately puts me in the loser's bracket, which is unfortunate.
Going into the next round, I paired against a pretty standard deck with Phoenix on point, Silverwolf on free ball, and an odd one being Drawn Brave on low flat. This is a deck that I felt pretty confident going up against. I think the biggest concern was Silverwolf, which is why I led off with Shark. We ended up matching up against Drawn Brave, but because Shark is pretty heavy and relatively well balanced, we still ended up outspinning it. Going into the second round, we ended up matching Wizard Rod against Wolf, which can be a pretty close match, but I did spend a decent amount of time balance tuning this rod, so it should have fairly decent stamina, and we do end up actually taking this one with a spin finish, leaving us with 2 points. Going into the next round, we matched Leon Claw against Phoenix, which is generally a relatively good matchup, but they ended up getting a burst on us, leaving the score tied up 2-2. After reshuffling, we end up matching Shark against Silverwolf, and unfortunately, we don't end up taking this round, dropping us yet another point, leaving us at 3-2 currently. In the following round, we end up matching Wizard Rod against Drawn Brave, and again, it's not able to KO us, so we end up sneaking by with another point, leaving the score tied up 3-3. There ended up being like 4 snipes during this round, so I ended up trying to aim for the back corner, and it still ended up intercepting, but we were able to both hit the stadium, and I ended up taking this with an extreme finish, proving that Leon Claw is, of course, S tier. And with that, we won the match, so we are now 1-1 in the tournament. What do you think of Leon Claw?
I think it's the best Beyblade ever invented.
Yeah.
No other Beyblade that ever been invented is better than Leon Claw, I swear.
Yeah, good answer. Going into the next round, we matched up against another Phoenix on 560 Gear Flat, a Dragoon on 960 Elevate, and a Shark on 260 Low Rush, which is a bit of a weird pick to me, 260 being a little burst prone, but I know that some people end up using it on Shark. I'm personally not a huge fan, but overall, this deck wasn't super frightening to me. I think 560 on Dragoon would have been a little more optimal, and Gear Flat isn't particularly amazing on Phoenix. I think the Shark combo could potentially be all right, although again, 260 is not one that I would have picked. But in general, this isn't a deck that I was super concerned about. In the first round, we end up matching Shark against Dragoon, and we get a really sneaky little extreme finish here, netting us 3 points. For the next round, we match Rod into Shark, which is a little scary in terms of burst risk. We do a mild tilt just to try to avoid any ratchet sniping, but we end up taking the round pretty convincingly. It's not able to make any good impact towards the pockets. And then going into what would be the final round, we end up matching Leon Claw into Phoenix Wing, which again is a pretty good matchup for Leon Claw, and we end up getting a burst, giving us the win for the match, leaving us with a total score of 2-1 so far for the tournament. In my next match, I end up playing against a younger kid who had some really spicy combos. He had a Valkyrie, which I hadn't even played against before, which was a little concerning to me because I wasn't 100% sure what was good into it. So he ended up using Shelter Drake on, I believe, 570 Orb, Valkyrie on 960 Ball, and Phoenix on 260 Transpoint. I ended up leading off the match with Wizard Rod, and he led off with Shelter Drake, and we ended up getting a pretty lucky extreme finish. I think Wizard Rod matches up pretty well into this combo in general, but I'm not going to say no to an extra 3 points. Following that, we end up matching Shark into the Valkyrie combo, and we don't end up with a ton of good contact, end up missing a lot of big hits, but we end up outspinning it anyway. In the following round, we get pretty lucky with yet another Leon Claw versus Phoenix Wing matchup, but unfortunately for me, I end up getting pocketed, losing us 2 points. After reshuffling, he ends up leading with Phoenix, which he had just gotten points with, so it makes sense he felt comfortable in that because that had netted him points, but it matched into my Wizard Rod on Hexa, and unfortunately for the Phoenix, it was on 260. And like I said earlier, it does tend to be a little burst prone, and that ends up being what happens, netting us another win, leaving us with a total score of 3-1 in the tournament. For the next match, I ended up paired against a guy with more off-meta picks, which I can respect, with Reaper on 560 Kick, Scorpio on 360 Wedge, and finally Whale on 960 Ball. A lot of these aren't ones that I've come across too much in competitive play, so again, lots of respect to people who are trying to innovate or use stuff that they like. For the first round, we end up matching Wizard Rod into Reaper, and we end up getting a spin finish off of it. Reaper is an interesting one. I think it matches up pretty well into other attack types, but into stamina types, it tends to struggle quite a bit, so not a super surprising win there. Going into the next round, we match Shark against Whale and get good initial contact, but end up going out the extreme zone, losing 3 points, with a score of 1-3 currently. So going into the next match, we end up putting Leon Claw up against Scorpio Spear, which is not a great matchup for us. Leon Claw doesn't do well into Scorpio, and that's the main combo that I was concerned about. We end up getting Extreme Finished, losing us the match, putting us at a score of 3-2 for the tournament.
And this is where things get a little tricky, because if I lose one more match, I'm completely out of the tournament, and in order to win the entire tournament, I need to win like close to 9.
Going into the next round, I needed to lock in. I was rematching the guy that I lost to in the first round, and his deck had changed slightly. He ended up making an alteration to his Pegasus Blast combo, swapping out the free ball for Hexa, making it a little bit more tankier. Actually, a combo that I enjoy quite a bit. I actually made a combo video on Pegasus Blast on Hexa, although I use 960 instead of 760, mostly because I end up running 760 on other builds, but overall, a really cool combo. Going into the first round, we end up matching Wizard Rod against Wyvern, and there's actually something interesting here that I didn't notice during the match, but it looks like it's possible we may have had midair collision before this match, which would have constituted a relaunch, but I didn't catch it at the time, and I'm still not 100% sure that that's what happened, just due to the angle of it, but it's definitely a possibility. Anyway, I end up taking the first round, netting 1 point. In the next round, we end up matching Shark against Phoenix, which is actually the round that I lost the first time we matched, where Shark burst. So, hoping to avoid that, I end up launching towards the left side of the stadium, the B side, in order to try to get sort of a sneaky reverse tungsten launch to drop down. It doesn't end up happening, but we do end up taking the spin finish for 1 point. In the next round, I matched up Leon Claw against Pegasus Blast, which again is not a great matchup for it. I ended up trying to reverse tungsten, but way over tilted, and it just ended up stalling out. Not that it would have necessarily made a big difference, but definitely was trying to optimize the launch and ended up missing it. We ended up losing 1 point here to a spin finish. After reshuffling, we end up leading off with Wizard Rod against Pegasus Blast. Again, they're both on Hexa, but as long as Wizard Rod doesn't get KO'd, then it should outspin Pegasus Blast pretty convincingly. I actually almost ended up running Pegasus Blast in this tournament myself, but using Leon Claw, I felt like Wizard Rod was just a safer option. I think Pegasus Blast is a great third option as sort of a defense build, especially on Hexa. But because I had that extra slot filled with Leon Claw, I just couldn't afford to risk losing the matchup against Wizard Rod or Dragoon. We do end up taking another point from Pegasus Blast, and then we end up matching Shark into Wyvern. And unfortunately, we end up losing a point here to a spin finish. We weren't able to get big enough hits to knock it out. Both of these blades are super hyper aggressive, really good attack options, so the matchup against each other was pretty interesting to watch. Again, like I said, this is my first tournament using Shark, and against Wyvern, I wasn't super sure which one would take the match, but Wyvern did end up taking this one, losing us a singular point. And in the final round of the match, we end up matching Leon Claw against Phoenix Wing, and fortunately for me, we were able to make almost instant contact, and we ended up knocking it straight into the pocket. The guy I played against was super cool, and since we were tied 1-1, we both agreed that at the next tournament we would settle the score, which we did at the Hasbro Secret Showdown, which I will be posting a video on fairly soon. In the next round, we matched up against some scary stuff, including Aero Pegasus on 960 level, Drawn Buster on 160 low flat, and Tyranno Bait on 360 low rush. Aero Pegasus is one that I still find scary because I don't have one and I've never tested it, and it just seems intimidating. Knowing my opponent was running basically all attack types, I opted to lead off with Wizard Rod on Hexa, and we ended up matching into his Drawn Buster, which, generally speaking, is a pretty good matchup. If you can avoid Buster for the first few hits, it's pretty unlikely that it's going to win past that point. We ended up actually getting lucky with a KO, netting us 2 points. In the next matchup, it was Shark versus Arrow, and I ended up stalling towards the top, positioning myself behind Arrow and pushing it towards the extreme finish, which ended up working in my favor, netting us the last 3 points and the game. This match had put us into top cut, so this next match was going to lead us up into finals if we could end up winning it. We ended up matching against another Shark combo on 260 level, Dragoon on 560 elevate, and Scorpio on 960 kick. Going into the first round, we matched up Wizard Rod against Scorpio Spear on kick, and I ended up going for a reverse tungsten trying to stall out, but he ends up clipping me, but it doesn't matter because we end up bursting him. In the next round, we end up matching Shark against Dragoon, and while the guy does end up self-KOing, for the WBO rules, no contact means a relaunch, so we don't end up getting the points. We end up going and relaunching again, and unfortunately for me, this time, it doesn't go in my favor. In the next round, we've got Leon Claw against Shark, which is a pretty terrifying matchup, and it doesn't go in our favor, instantly slicing Leon Claw in half, losing us 2 points. And in the last round, we match up Shark against Dragoon again, and unfortunately, we get knocked back into the same pocket. Shark apparently just really liked that pocket today, so... Next round, we've got Wizard Rod against Shark, and my opponent self-KOs again, but there's 2 free self-KOs, so I don't get any points. And in what would be the last round, we've got Wizard Rod against Shark, and it looks pretty good. I initially knock Shark into the pocket, and then they trade places, and my 160 does not get me back out of the pocket, losing us the match.
And with that, my tournament arc ended. Unfortunately, I did not take it with Leon Claw this time, although I feel like I played pretty well overall. I think I ended up leaving with like around a 70% win rate, which is perfectly respectable, very good. I can't complain about that too much. Obviously, playing with Leon Claw is not super easy. I actually feel like I lost more rounds using Shark than I did with Leon, at least in terms of like point calculation. I ended up bursting and self-KOing with Shark, which didn't help me out at all, but it was a fairly new release, so I was going in a bit blind with it. But overall, I had a really good time. It was really nice to see a bunch of friends that I hadn't seen in quite a while. Unfortunately, after the tournament, I had to go to an auto parts store and fix my upper radiator hose, which they didn't have in stock, so I had to use a patch kit, and it was a nightmare. But I ended up fixing it. I made it home, and yeah, that was it. But I didn't leave empty-handed. I did grab this from the local shop that was there, which is the Whale, which has the recolor of Wheel, which is pretty cool. So I did get something out of it. So yeah, this and busted up a radiator hose. So, you know, which the patch kit lasted for about 48 hours, and then it popped another pinhole, so I had to go buy another hose. So I ended up spending like almost double because I didn't have tools in my... Anyway, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I made it home. It's fine. But yeah, I had a good time. So if you guys enjoyed the video and the more sort of in-depth explanation of sort of like the whole deck process and building everything, this video took a ton of effort. It's a lot more effort than I typically put in these tournament videos. If you liked it, let me know down in the comments. Smash the like, subscribe if you guys haven't already. I have a ton of content for Beyblade X, including a whole guide playlist that talks about different launch techniques and different strategies and theory crafting, deck stuff. So yeah, feel free to check that out if you guys haven't. But yeah, see you guys in the next one.
You can come up to the front here,
Andre.
Blaze first. Can you come up to the front?
What do you think of Leon Claw?
I think it's the best Beyblade ever invented.
Yeah.
No other Beyblade that ever been invented is better than Leon Claw, I swear.
Yeah, good answer.